Have you ever wondered what that dish everyone in the village raves about is really made of? Not flour, not spices, but resentment, soaked over generations, and maggots dug from human corpses in the dark of night. In Bayoma, a remote town hidden deep in Nigeria's sacred forest, people no longer believe in medicine. They only believe in Mirembe's noodles. Children, after eating, would talk back to their mothers, but kneel at the feet of the cook. Grown men skipped farm work just to line up for breakfast. And the mothers? They stayed silent, watching their children change a little more each day. What did she feed them? And why was everyone so blindly devoted? No one asked, because everyone was full and smiling, until Naima, a single mother, heard her daughter whisper, "Mirembe," in her sleep. That night, under a blood moon, she followed the woman, because some dishes don't just take your taste buds, they take your soul. And some cooks don't feed you to nourish. They feed you to settle a score written in blood. Here, at Tales of Black, we tell the stories the world tried to forget, told in whispers, in tears, and in boiling pots at midnight. In the heart of Bayoma, before dawn even opened its eyes, people were already lining up. Not for water, not for fuel, but for noodles. More precisely, Mirembe's noodles. They called it food of the gods, breakfast for the soul, or simply, the one thing that made my family whole again. Everyone had a name for it. But they all agreed on one thing. They couldn't stop eating it. Farmers, preachers, toddlers, elders. If you had it once, you came back the next day, and sooner the day after that. Some even brought mats and slept outside her stall. "I once waited 3 hours just to get a bowl," a large man recalled. "And I'd wait again if I had to." No one knew where she cooked. No one ever saw her buy ingredients. And no one knew her age. Her skin looked soft like a young girl's, but cold like the stone of an ancient grave. When Mirembe stepped out each morning, the air bent around her. She walked neither fast nor slow. In her hands was a large iron pot, filled with a thick golden brown broth that smelled intoxicating. She greeted no one. She didn't smile. She didn't have to. Everyone bowed. An old woman once whispered, "She doesn't need to speak. Her breath alone makes us obey." Then the children began to change. They stopped playing. They no longer laughed out loud. No more tantrums or whining, just long stares at the adults. As if they knew something. One boy was slapped by his mother for stealing money to buy noodles. He stood still, didn't cry, just whispered, "Don't hit me, Mama, or I'll tell Mirembe." The mother froze. And from that day on, she quietly slipped money into his pocket each morning, like paying a tax. The people of Bayoma no longer lived to work. They worked just to survive. One bowl at a time, a woman, 7 months pregnant, showed up every morning. An old man, leg broken, dragged himself with both arms just to touch the pot. No one asked why this dish had turned them all into willing slaves. Only one person stood apart, Naima, a single mother of 3. The only one in Bayoma who had never tasted a single spoonful. She used to be the village nurse. She'd cared for Mirembe back when she first arrived. A frail, timid girl with burn scars across her face, like she'd survived a fire. Then one day, Mirembe vanished, and years later she returned. Younger, prettier, quieter, and opened a noodle stall. Naima always sensed something was wrong, but she had no proof. Until one night, her youngest daughter, just 8 years old, woke up in the dark, eyes blank, lips moving. "Mama, you don't need to make breakfast anymore. I only need Mirembe's." That's when Naima knew. Mirembe's noodles weren't just made of water, oil, and dry packets. They were made of something else. In Bayoma, people used to whisper, "Some scents don't come from kitchens. They rise from graves." No one had ever been inside the house behind Mirembe's stall. No one had ever heard a single clang of pots. No fire, no smoke, no wood burning. Yet each morning, the pot was full, and the smell reached the edge of the forest. Naima began to notice. She stayed up every night, eyes locked on the small house at the end of the red dirt road, where Mirembe lived. And then, on a crescent moon night, a night when even the crickets went silent, Naima saw the door creak open. A figure stepped out. No footsteps, only silence. She carried a black bag, swaying like it held something still alive. Naima knew tonight was the night. Mirembe walked into the forbidden paths, trails where no one dared tread, the land of the forgotten children, a cursed forest where villagers buried stillborn babies, exiled criminals, and nameless bodies washed in by floodwaters. No one went there after sunset, because in that forest there was no wind, only the sound of bones crying. Naima followed a few steps behind, breath held tight. She had never seen anything like this. Mirembe stopped at a moss-covered pile of stones, kneeled, opened the bag, and began pulling out worms from small holes in the ground, like ancient burial pits. But they weren't ordinary worms. They were deep red, like clotted blood, and they smelled like burnt human fat. Each forgotten child gives me one more, Mirembe whispered to herself. I don't kill anyone. I only use what the world threw away. Naima covered her mouth. Her stomach turned. She wanted to scream. But what crushed her more was the memory of that smell on her daughter's hands. After eating noodles, it smelled just like this. After gathering a handful of worms, Mirembe pulled out a small vial, shimmering gold. She poured it into the bag. The moment the liquid touched the worms, they twitched, and then began to give off a sweet scent. Lemongrass, pepper, sesame oil. They must smell good. They must taste divine. I don't need them to love me. I just need them to crave me. Naima followed her all the way back to the house. She crouched beneath the window, peeking through a gap in the wooden wall. Mirembe lit the stove, dropped the worms into the boiling pot, one by one, each one melting like soft meat. No blood, no bubbles, just human flesh transformed. Then she began chanting. Not in Yoruba, not Hausa, not English, but in a tongue long dead for centuries. A plume of violet smoke rose from the pot. It didn't drift. It went straight up, like it was headed somewhere, like it was sending a message. The meal is ready. Naima trembled. She turned and ran, not back home, just away, far away, until the sky turned pink with morning. And in that silence she understood. The thing that had seduced an entire town was the flesh of restless souls. And the woman cooking them had once been a victim, too. Naima returned home just as the sky began to lighten. Her legs trembled. Her hands still smelled of dirt and smoke. No one knew what she had witnessed the night before, but her heart knew. Something terrifying was swallowing Bayoma, one spoonful at a time. She stepped into the house and saw her daughter sitting quietly by the door. The girl looked up, eyes still sleepy, but not innocent. There was something in her gaze, a kind of maturity no child should wear. You're back, Mama? Mirembe said I don't have to go to school today. She's going to teach me how to serve adults at her stall. Naima froze. That voice wasn't her daughter's. Not the little girl who used to cry for hugs every morning. What is she teaching you? Naima asked, trying to steady her voice. How to see through people who lie, like you're doing right now. Naima reached out to hold her, but the small hand pushed her away. There was pity in the child's eyes. You don't understand. Mirembe said, people like you disappear. Naima broke down in tears, not out of fear, but because her daughter was slipping away from her. That night, Naima didn't go to work. She lit a single candle, laid out a mat, and placed an old photo of her husband. A man who had once been a healer, a diviner, and a man who touched people's wounds with both hands and heart. She placed her hand over her chest. If you can still hear me, guide me, not to destroy Mirembe, but to save our daughter. The candle flickered and went out. The next morning, Naima walked to the edge of town to visit old Musa. the last living friend of her late husband, a silver-haired man, blind in one eye, living in a wooden shack, shunned by all. They said he could hear the voices of the dead. Naima told him everything, from the night she followed Mirembe, to the red worms transformed by golden liquid, to the ancient language she spoke, to the scent of flesh boiling in broth. Old Musa didn't flinch. He silently opened an old leather notebook. "She's no longer human," he said. "She's the awakening of a vengeful spirit, a child once burned alive, who returned, with fire made of hunger." "I don't want to kill her," Naima said. "I just want my daughter back." Old Musa closed his eyes. "Then you must do what no one has dared. Break the pact. With the light of the living, bring truth into the daylight." Together they formed a plan. Naima would go to the stall, pretend she'd changed, create a scene, force Mirembe to react. Meanwhile, old Musa would gather a few villagers, the ones who still hadn't eaten the noodles, the ones still awake. They would bear witness. The next morning, Naima arrived at the stall, holding her daughter in her arms. For the first time, she asked for a bowl of noodles. The entire town seemed to hold its breath. Mirembe looked at her. "I thought you didn't need me anymore," she said, her voice cold as midnight. Naima smiled. "Today I do. Not because I'm hungry, but because I want to taste the thing that made this whole town forget what's real and what's right." A long silence followed. Mirembe slowly ladled noodles into a bowl, placed it before Naima. "Eat. Maybe you'll stop hurting." Naima picked up the chopsticks, but before they reached her mouth, old Musa stepped out from the shadows, and behind him, a group of villagers, men, women, and children, each holding one thing, a mirror. The sun had just reached the treetops, its golden light slanting sideways, as if exposing everything that had been buried for far too long. Naima stood in the center of the circle. In her hands, a bowl of steaming noodles. She didn't eat. She simply raised the chopsticks and stared directly at Mirembe. "Is this food?" she asked. "Or is it a blood pact this town swallows every day without knowing?" Mirembe didn't respond. She only smiled. Not the smile of the living, but the shattering sound of a soul that once burned alive. Then, old Musa's voice broke the silence. Deep, solemn like the beating of ritual drums. "Mirembe, or whatever your true name may be, today, before the mirrors of the living, you must choose. Reveal the recipe you serve this town, or let the mirror reflect your true form." One by one, the mirrors rose. Sunlight bounced off their surfaces, and at that precise moment, Mirembe's skin began to crack. From her flawless, pearl-like complexion came blisters, scorch marks, dry, splitting lines, as if time itself was peeling her open. She stepped back, but no one looked away. "You want to know the recipe?" she growled, her voice starting to fracture. "Fine, listen closely. I didn't kill anyone. I didn't poison anyone. I just cooked what the world had thrown away. The worms from the bodies no one claimed. The oil rendered from half-burned flesh. The spices were the cries that were never heard. And the fire, that came from the day my father was burned alive before my eyes. Do you remember that?" Silence blanketed the square. Naima's eyes welled with tears, not out of fear, but because she knew. She wasn't just witnessing a curse. She was witnessing a girl being murdered a second time, not by fire, but by years of silence. Mirembe lifted her face to the sky, but her voice was no longer hers alone. It echoed, dozens of voices, like a choir of the dead screaming through her throat. He was my father. He dared to speak out, against the village elders who preyed on poor girls, so they accused him of violating the king's wife. And who led the charge? The very old men sitting in the front rows today. Who am I? I'm the child who had to watch her father burn, while my mother had stood by and laughed. The crowd began to shake. Some wept. Others dropped to their knees. An old man stammered, "Mirembe, we didn't know. Back then we just followed what people said." She turned to him, her eyes no longer red, just empty. "You didn't know? Then why were you the first to throw a stone?" As I ran through the flames, Naima stepped forward. She placed a hand on Mirembe's shoulder. Now fragile, fading. I don't defend them, but I can't let you destroy these children. The way you were destroyed. Mirembe exhaled. I didn't destroy them. I gave them a choice. And sadly, they all chose me. Because I listened, and their mothers didn't. Old Musa came forward. He uncorked a vial of sacred ancestral water. Poured a single drop on her forehead. She didn't scream, didn't fight. She simply closed her eyes and whispered like a lullaby. Fire took my father. I only returned the favor. With breakfast, the town of Bayoma stood still. No one dared pick up a pair of chopsticks after that. And that evening, for the first time in 3 years, Mirembe's stall sat empty. After that morning, Mirembe's noodle stall remained closed. No one dared go near it. No one ate anymore. And yet, the scent of noodles still drifted softly in the breeze. There were no more long lines, no more children whispering her name in their sleep. No more bowed heads, afraid of offending the divine. Only one figure remained, an old woman, sitting quietly at her doorstep, cooking a dish no one wanted to taste anymore. 3 days later, the king of Bayoma, a quiet man, heavy with regret, summoned Mirembe to the palace. She didn't resist, didn't flinch, didn't wear royal robes. She walked in wearing a tattered ash-colored shawl, hair tied high, like a woman who had never learned to bow. In the grand hall, the king was already waiting. No throne, no guards, only tears in his eyes. He had once been the little boy who threw a stone at her father during the public execution. Mirembe, he said, if I hadn't turned my back that day, if I'd spoken up, maybe your father would still be alive. And maybe I wouldn't be here now, bowing my head, asking for your forgiveness. She looked at him. You weren't the only one who stayed silent, she said. A whole generation was taught that silence was safety. And they called it tradition. The king lowered his head. I don't expect forgiveness. I only ask that you return to the palace. Not as queen, but as something even more sacred. The keeper of memory. The one who reminds us never to forget. The town of Bayoma watched in awe as Mirembe climbed the palace steps. Not with anger, but with the calm of someone who had returned every ounce of pain to the ones who had sent it. From that day forward, once a week, Mirembe cooked one final pot of noodles. No magic, no worms, no oil from the dead. Just noodles, water, green onions, and a pinch of salt. Naima was the first to try it. She cried, for the first time, this meal doesn't make me afraid. It makes me remember how my parents used to hold me. Years passed. Mirembe lived quietly in the garden behind the palace. She cooked only for orphans, spoke little at town meetings, and spent most days sitting by the ashes of a fire. Not to burn the past, but to remember it. Then, one moonless night, with the wind cold as breath from another world, she was found on her bamboo chair, smiling. Beside her, an old iron pot, still warm with a little boiling water inside. No one cried. There was no grand funeral, just a wooden sign placed in front of her old stall. Don't forget the one who was burned, just for speaking the truth. From that day on, the people of Bayoma stopped rushing breakfast. They learned to cook for each other, to sit with one another, to listen, even when the truth their children spoke was hard to hear. Outro, Tales of Black. There were dishes once so powerful, they made an entire town bow down. But there were also mothers who stood up to protect their children's souls from the quietest kind of death, obedience in silence. If you've ever been the only one who dared speak, in a world trained to swallow and smile, if you've ever believed that truth still matters even when it's never said out loud, then this story was meant for you. Leave a comment if you saw yourself in this tale. Subscribe and share Tales of Black, where we tell the stories no one named, but that have always lived inside you.